Hi there everyone. We are at the Vatican Observatory with the guy who runs the observatory. It's Brother Guy Consolmagno, and we are here where the observatory is stationed in the papal summer gardens south of Rome. I even saw his chickens earlier, but...
It also is the location of the heliport where Pope Francis and Pope Benedict met as soon as Francis had been elected. It's just behind us over there.
Here's the little sign for the observatory. That's in Italian, is it?
Yes, specula is an ancient Italian word for observatory, and it has the same root as the word for a mirror, but it's spelled slightly differently.
Today's video is going to be all about telescopes, in particular the Vatican's telescopes. We're going to go on a little tour, we're going to jump in a car, let's do it and tell the story of telescopes.
Absolutely.
So it's a former convent, the actual observatory.
The observatory is the Basilian nuns used to be here. And then on the other side still is a convent of the Poor Clares. The chronology is odd because the oldest and the youngest telescopes are in the domes here in the gardens.
Yeah.
And the two in between are the ones in the castle. Let's go to the castle first. It's going to be a bit of a walk. We're going to go in that front door.
Yeah.
All the tourists are going to want to follow us, so we have to very quickly sneak in and out.
Poke my bill. Thank you.
There you go.
Wow. This is ridiculous. So now we're on the roof of Castel Gandolfo. This is
The Pope's Summer Palace. Although he doesn't come here anymore, this is now a museum.
Now there are some telescope domes here. We're going to talk about those in a moment. But these aren't the first telescope domes associated with the Vatican, are they?
Nor is this the first astronomical thing affiliated with this area. If you look across to Monte Cavo, you notice the notch off to the right. On certain times of the year when the sun rises, there will be a beam of light that comes through that notch and hits this side of the volcanic crater, leaving a long white streak, which in Latin is Alba Lunga. Alba Lunga is traditionally the birthplace of Romulus and Remus. So the locals here insist that Romulus and Remus came from here to go down and found the city of Rome.
Speaking of Rome, there used to be telescope domes there at the proper Vatican, didn't there?
That's right. Astronomy was part of the Vatican going to the medieval universities, but the modern observatory was founded in 1891 by Pope Leo XIII to show the world that the Church supported science, and also to show the world that the Vatican had a national observatory because it was its own nation. And they built the telescopes on the walls of the Vatican. In 1929, they finally signed the agreement with Italy so that the Vatican was recognized. This territory was given back to the Vatican, and at that point, the Pope then, who was Pius XI, invited the astronomers to leave the city lights of Rome and come out and build these telescopes. And it was marvelously dark here until the 1980s. At that point, the light pollution even here got so bad that they built a telescope in Arizona.
Okay, we'll come to that shortly. But first of all, can we have a look inside any of these ones?
Yes, let's take a look up in this one. You'll notice the plaque there in the sunlight. It's kind of hard to read, but the Latin is Deum, deity, God, Creator, God the Creator, Venite adoremus. If you know your Christmas carols, you know what that says. Venite adoremus. Come, let us adore him. Come, let us adore God the Creator.
Okay.
That's why you do the astronomy, after all. It's not going to make you rich. It's not going to make you famous. It's not going to get you girls. Didn't work for me. What it does do is it gets you closer in touch with the universe and closer in touch with the maker of the universe. Here we are. Okay, I need somebody with a strong back and a weak mind. That will unlatch it. You pull here.
Oh, look at that! I'm opening it with my bare hands, Brother Guy.
That's probably enough just to get the light in here. This giant piece of equipment was a 1935 Zeiss double astrograph telescope, one of only 4 in the world. And it's actually 2 telescopes and a common mounting. You'll have 2 different telescopes for 2 different kinds of work. Also, back in the early 1930s, photographic film was only sensitive to half of the visual. You either had red film or blue film. And so you could do simultaneous images, one in red and one in blue at the same time. If you look carefully, you see that the telescopes are actually different. This is a mirror with an eyepiece. So the light comes in, hits the mirror, gets focused up to a second mirror, comes back down, and you can look at it there. This is a big lens, and the lens focuses the light here where you would insert a photographic plate. And so those plates that I showed you in our headquarters, this is where the plates were taken. This was built in 1935 and was in pretty constant use through the 1970s. Even after we moved to Castel Gandolfo, there have been events that are only visible in this part of the world, an occultation of a star by Pluto, or the impact of Comet Shoemaker-Levy into Jupiter, where we did the observations using this telescope, even with the light pollution. Come on over here. This has been somewhat updated, and yet the actual motor itself is still the original. Turn on the power. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then this is a large amount of direct current power. These are some of them 110 volts and some of them 220 volts because Italy changed from 110 to 220 after the war. We have a clock that helps regulate the telescope. And you can hear it clicking here. And now that all of that is operating, we start the motor itself. Now, the stars are moving in the sky. And in order to follow the stars, taking a time exposure, you have the telescope moving with the motion of the stars. That axis is exactly parallel to the Earth's axis. The Earth is turning one way, the stars appear to move in the other way, so the telescope follows them along. And all of this apparatus, the clock, the clicking, and even this marvelous gizmo, come on over here, this whirling, spinning, absolutely fabulous bit of 1930s governor technology is to make sure that the telescope is at a constant rate.
So, Brother Guy, right now, the telescope is imperceptibly moving with the Earth.
Exactly. The other thing that happens is, as the telescope moves, you've got to be able to move with it. We can go up.
Whoa.
And we can move to the left. We can move to the right. And, if needs be, we can move the dome to be able to follow the things in the sky. Now, you've got to remember, if you're doing astronomy, in the 1930s, you're in this cold room at midnight, it's dark, you have no idea how high up you are, you're listening to that whirring motor, and you're listening to the wind, and you're trying to stay awake all night. It's astonishing that anything actually got done.
At that time, who was doing the observing here? Are they like priests and brothers, or are they like secular astronomers, or?
From the beginning, the observatory was in the hands of clergy. First, there were different priests who had been brought in. By 1905, they brought in a Jesuit. The Jesuits are the largest order, and we all tend to be overeducated. By 1930, they decided to hand the entire observatory to the Jesuit order to staff. So today there are a dozen astronomers. We're all Jesuit priests and brothers. We all belong to the same order, with the same superior, living together in a community under the same rule. Makes life very convenient.
At what point did these domes no longer become useful and you moved to the other ones on the grounds?
Well, these telescopes stayed in use until the 1970s, but in the 1940s they first moved the cartesian telescope out from Rome, mostly to protect it during the war. Ironically, this was the area that was bombed and Rome wasn't. And after the war, the final telescope was built here, the Schmidt telescope, in the 1950s. And those stayed in operation. I think the last plates date from 1982.
So we're just going to have a quick look in the second dome here at Castel Gandolfo, but this one's actually having some work done and there's scaffolding, so we're not going to get a proper look, but we'll have a sneaky peek.
So they're actually working on the dome itself, hence the scaffolding, but you can see the telescope, and it's a very different design of telescope from the other one. It actually has a 16-inch lens at the front, making it one of the 100th largest refractor telescopes in the world. This was optimized to look at double stars, to make small things big. Most telescopes don't make small things big, they make faint things bright. That's kind of different from what you normally think a telescope is going to do. But if you think of the Andromeda Galaxy, well, I could never see that, you need a telescope to see it. True. The reason you need the telescope is not because it's small, it's actually bigger than the moon in the sky, but it's much fainter. So you need a big mirror to gather the light and concentrate it onto a photographic plate.
A big bucket to catch all.
A big light bucket, exactly.
Yeah. Brother Guy, what's the work they're doing on the dome here?
Well, the slit wouldn't open. It's a marvelous piece of wooden construction from 1935, but wood will flex, wood will expand and contract. At one point, we got the slit open, couldn't close it, and when the rain comes, you want to be sure it's closed, so we got it closed, but we don't dare open it again until they fix it.
Oh, it was good that we got to have a little sneaky look in here anyway.
Notice the date there, 1708 or 28, I'm not sure which.
Great door.
But whatever it is, old. Shall we?
All right,
Quick to do it quickly.
Do it quickly. So now we're driving back through the Papal Gardens to where the other two domes are, and we're going to see two more telescopes. All right.
You can see from the plaque, this walkway was set up by Pius XII in the first year of his pontificate, which would have been 1939, just as a place to be able to take a walk while it covered during the rain. This was built 2 years later, just this side of it originally. Come on in. This is underneath the Cartesian dome.
Right.
And the two telescopes in this building now are the Cartesian, which dates from 1891, and the Schmidt telescope from the 1950s. Both of them were used photographically. They're both photographic cameras. And where we're standing right now used to be the location of the darkroom. You would have a darkroom to prepare the photographic plates before taking them upstairs. And over there was the bathroom. One day, Father McCarthy was working in the darkroom when he sees the door about to open, somebody from the outside, and he shouts, "Shut the door! Who the heck do you think you are?" And the voice on the other side, "Sorry, just looking for the bathroom." Pope Paul VI.
When you gotta go, you gotta go.
When you come this way, you'll see why this place was built.
Wow.
Remember that 1891 telescope to photograph the sky, the Cartesian? This is the telescope.
Okay, Brother Guy, before we talk about it, can we open it up so James gets more light?
Absolutely. This one we have a modern motor.
So look, it's beautiful. Oh, wow.
Now the actual motor that drives the telescope is not the original. It dates instead from 1936. This is a photograph of the telescope about 1900 with Father Lace doing the observations. Those wooden steps are those wooden steps. This telescope is that telescope. It's been painted white in the last 120 years. This clock is this clock. And that guy's beard is also right here.
So, Brother Guy, this is called the Cartesian telescope. Why is it called that? What's this all about?
About 1880, somebody took a photograph of a comet with a telescope. Really exciting stuff. And then they noticed that in the background of the photograph, you could see stars down to 7th or 8th or 9th, faint stars. And someone had the idea, why don't we photograph the entire sky as a way of finally measuring the positions of faint stars. It was such a big project, no one observatory could do it. So they opened it up to all of the national observatories around the world, and the Vatican wanted to be recognized as a nation, so they said, count us in too. Everybody bought identical telescopes. It actually is two telescopes. There is a smaller lens about so big that you look through, this is the eyepiece, and then a bigger lens about 12, 15 inches across that directed the light down to here where you would put a photographic plate. So you would guide the telescope to make sure it was in the right spot with the eye, and then you take the photographic plate, make your exposure, move it to the next location, make the exposure, and it only took about 25 years to make all of these different exposures. Because you wanted to be able to go back and fix and change and adjust, they wanted to keep the telescope alive and working. And by 1929, light pollution in Rome made it impossible to use this telescope from Rome. So in 1942, they moved it out here to Castel Gandolfo and made actually the final images, to some extent, some were being made as late as the 1970s.
So here's the shutter. So once the plate's been put in, expose, and then close.
And of course, it was all run on a motor, but in the 1890s, they didn't have electric motors. So what they had was a clockwork and a falling weight that actually fell through the pillar holding that end of the telescope. The current electric motor was installed last year. This telescope is a completely functioning, absolutely beautiful piece of work. I observed with it 2 nights ago looking at the moon. It's actually run off a little laptop computer, and from the telescope, this is what we use.
Is that the original one from the 1800s?
This must be an 1890 Xbox machine. There's this marvelous gear system that's in place, and you just move it out, and then you can move the telescope as you want. And then when it's the location you want, you just move it back in again.
Can I move the whole telescope by hand? Oh, look at the power!
Right. When you take the lens cap off, it's completely balanced and you can move it with one finger.
It makes that big a difference.
Yeah.
Look at that. Oh, this is the best ever.
And then when you're ready, and you lock it, and there it is.
Now it's not moving anywhere. That's amazing.
I should close up so it doesn't rain on us.
So this second dome was added later.
Right.
Right.
Because by the 1950s, there was a new way of photographing the sky. And from about 1960 or so until 1982, this was the telescope of choice. This is a kind of a telescope called a Schmidt, and it's a bizarre and wonderful design. There is at the very top a giant plate with a bizarre shape that makes the light spread out, hits a spherical mirror, which then focuses the light. If you look, there's a little round door with a handle you can just barely see in the gray part. You'd open that up and you would take one of these glass plates, insert it in a holder that was slightly bent so that it would be in focus across the entire field of view. And you could get a large swath of the sky to photograph at once. Astronomy changed with Angelo Secchi in the 1870s, a great Jesuit astronomer, who stopped asking where are the stars in the sky and began to ask what are the stars. In order to study that, you need to know the spectra. You need to take each star's light and spread it out, red at one end, blue at the other end, and see what colors are missing, and that tells you what metals are present in the sky. How do you take the light of a telescope and turn it into a spectrum? You need to push that light through a prism. Let me show you. Come on, follow me upstairs.
Okay.
Unfortunately, this thing weighs a ton. I can't pull it out. This is a giant glass prism, and it fits on the end of the telescope.
So you literally put it like at the business end?
At the business end, not where the photographic plate is. You'd put it before the light even comes in. And then every star in the plate becomes a little spectrum. And with this method, they could photograph the spectra of hundreds of stars at once. These things are so heavy, we're not quite sure how to get them out so that people can see them. But we'll figure out a way.
I've been going to the gym a bit lately. Do you want me to just bicep curl?
Don't break your arm.
We'll leave that one for later.
Right. This was, as I say, the telescope that was, the best from the 1960s to the 1980s. Well, as you know, the Pope spends the summers here in Castel Gandolfo. Let's go downstairs. It so happened that in the summer of 1969, in particular the night of July 20th, 1969, Pope Paul came to visit the telescope.
So he's sitting pretty much where you're standing?
He's sitting right where I'm standing, looking at a television screen, which was probably right about here, watching the Apollo 11 moon landing.
So the Pope watched the first moon landing right here.
And on that microphone, he recorded a message to the astronauts. basically congratulating them and telling them, of course, that all of our prayers are with them. That's Paul VI.
Watching a moon landing on a television, pretty much where you're standing, James.
Exactly.
Amazing.
So this is him again that same night. I said it was a camera. How can he be looking through a telescope that's only a camera? He's not looking through the telescope. He's looking through the finder scope.
Okay.
The other telescope picture we have across there, that's Pope Pius XII. And he's the one who actually paid for this telescope, which was built in 1957-58. And he died in the end of 1958. So he lived long enough to be able to see the telescope in place. He loved astronomy.
Do you think if you didn't at the time have a pope who was a bit of an astronomy buff, it would have been harder to have got this telescope funded? Or?
Oh, it would have been impossible to get it funded because this is a very expensive telescope.
Right.
The church didn't pay for this telescope. His personal family fortune paid for the telescope.
Oh, right.
The Pope himself bought this telescope for us.
So this is the Pope's telescope. Now, of course, you've mentioned Rome got too bright. You couldn't have your telescopes there anymore. Eventually here at Castel Gandolfo it got too bright, and now these telescopes are kind of museum pieces and tourist attractions. What do you use now as an observatory for your actual hardcore science?
Our first idea was to just move to Tucson, Arizona, where we had contacts. They've got telescopes on every mountain surrounding Tucson, and we could just borrow whatever telescope we needed there. After we had been set up in Tucson for a couple of years, a telescope engineer by the name of Roger Angel came up with a new way of making telescope mirrors. If you melt the glass, put it in an oven that spins, it will flow into a parabola. He got enough money to make one mirror this way, and it worked. And he came to the Vatican Observatory and said, if you build a telescope around the mirror, we can set it up here in Tucson. That's the telescope we use to this day, the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope. And not only does it work fabulously, but also we can claim that the Pope has a telescope made by an angel, because his name was Roger Angel.
Very nice, very nice. And so the Vatican's official working telescope these days is in Arizona.
Is in Arizona.
Okay.
So we've got a little house in town where people live, and then whoever's using the telescope will take a Jeep up to the top of the mountain, use it for 4 or 5 days, come back down, and the next person goes up to use it.
But the observatory itself is still here just outside Rome.
Well, the observatory is an institution. And the institution is where we have our libraries, where we have our computers to reduce the data, where we meet, where we invite other people to meet. There's a lot more that goes on than just looking through a telescope.
If you'd like to see even more with Brother Guy, the Pope's astronomer, we've got a video on objectivity all about these papal space rocks and clocks, and also some of those cartesian plates. And we've got an extended interview with Brother Guy on our 60 Symbols channel. There are links on the screen and down in the description. And if you just want more telescope tours, well, we've got a bunch of them on Deep Sky Videos. Check out our telescope tour playlist.